Guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we have something very exciting for you. We're going to go over a brief recap of the 2023 season and give a preview of the 2024 season, including some quick stats about the 2023 season. And we're going to go each team, team by team in reverse championship order and talk about what they did during the season and what they need to do going into 2024. And then we'll wrap this thing up and we'll prepare as the 2024 season comes to play. Let's go ahead. Let's jump on into it. But first, go ahead, hit subscribe down below if you're an F1 fan just like me. This is going into my second full season of being a fan of F1, and I could not be more excited to see what comes of it. So go ahead, hit subscribe down below, and let me know down in the comment section below who your favorite team is and who your favorite driver is. Hit the like button as well. Let's go ahead. Let's jump on into this and take a look at some quick stats. So guys, the 2023 season was wild from start to finish, if maybe not just a little bit boring at the top, but that's neither here nor there. We saw 22 races, of course, with Imola being canceled. We visited 20 countries. We had 3 total winners, 2 Red Bulls and Carlos Sainz, of course. The world champion was Max Verstappen, and the world constructors champion obviously is Red Bull. Red Bull dominated the season effectively from start to finish, with the only blemish on their record coming in Singapore with Ferrari and Carlos Sainz taking the win there. It was a dominant season, and I don't know if we'll see one quite like that again. At least I can certainly hope not. But I want to go ahead, jump right into the individual teams, what they saw in 2023, and one thing that I think that they could see going into 2024 and what they need to focus on the most. We'll go ahead, we'll start with my boys, Haas F1 team. Definitely the talk of the town as we head into the beginning of the season, just because the late call to part with former team principal Gunther Steiner and Ayo Komatsu. I want to say, I apologize if I butchered the pronunciation of that name, taking over for him going into the season, and the quotes that have come out from them are definitely not the most inspiring as they prepare for preseason testing coming up here in February. But in 2023, we had Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg as the lineup, finishing 19th and 16th in the championship respectively. I would say the most memorable moment of the season, I think, is a toss-up between Nico Hülkenberg's P7 in Australia or Nico Hülkenberg's sprint race result in Austria. Both of those were very exciting from start to finish, and in a season like Haas had, you really have to take the little victories where you can. It was very, very, very fun to watch him score decent points in Australia, as well as fire back through the field on the medium tires and the wild sprint race in Austria. And I think the main focus for 2024 for Haas, absolutely, you need to get that outrageous tire wear under control. I think obviously there's a lot of other things that held them back going through last season, but when you're chewing through tires at double the rate of almost every single other team, it's never going to work out for you, and I think you got to get that under control. I believe in you. Please just do something this year, I beg of you. Moving on to Alfa Romeo, or Sauber, or now as we're going to be calling them Kick, going into 2024. They had Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu and their driver lineup finishing 15th and 18th respectively. I think their most memorable moment of the season was a double points finish in Qatar as they finished P8 and P9. Sort of similar to Haas, they had a bit of a tough season, but they were definitely a lot closer to the rest of the field than I think Haas was. They had a lot of fun with Valtteri Bottas, I think, just kind of really stepping into his Kimi Räikkönen sunset tour across the grid. Obviously, we know that Valtteri still is a very quick race car driver, but at this point, I think some questions are probably going to be asked in that Sauber group, especially as we start to move towards the transition to Audi coming up in 2026. I think the main focus for Alfa Romeo going into next season is definitely going to be just to take a step forward and not let the loss of Alfa Romeo as the title sponsor distract from developing the car in 2024. There was obviously a lot of memes and things around the name of the team was going to go into effect starting this year before the introduction of Audi, like I mentioned. So hopefully none of that distracted the team from developing the car going into this season, and we'll see what they can put on track here in February. Moving on to AlphaTauri. Yes, I will be referring to them as AlphaTauri in this section. They had actually 4 drivers compete for AlphaTauri in 2023. Those were Yuki Tsunoda, Daniel Ricciardo, Liam Lawson, and of course Nick De Vries, who started the season and was the first driver to lose their seat for the 2023 season. Yuki finished 14th, Daniel finished 17th, Liam Lawson actually finished 20th, and Nyck de Vries finished 22nd. This was actually a weirdly wild and entertaining thing to follow across the season, as AlphaTauri was kind of a rotating door of drivers coming in and either performing or not. I think their most memorable moment of the season was the return of Daniel Ricciardo. Obviously, Nyck de Vries didn't work out for them in the beginning part of the season, and ultimately he was replaced by Daniel Ricciardo, but only for, I think, 1 or 2 race weekends before he ended up breaking his hand and was then subsequently replaced with Liam Lawson, who I actually went really back and forth on him being the most memorable moment versus the return of Daniel. But it's Daniel Ricciardo. Can you really blame me? I think the one thing that they need to focus on going into 2024 is basically just copy Red Bull at literally every opportunity as much as the regulations will allow. We've gotten a lot of talk over the offseason that this is effectively exactly what they're going to want to do, and they're even having Christian Horner come out and say that they're wanting AlphaTauri to be title contenders going into this season and forward. So basically use that connection to your advantage. And I mean, we saw a lot of positive momentum for them down the end of last season, but at this point, just copy Red Bull. It's probably going to work. Moving on to Williams, one of my guilty pleasure teams for sure. I'm a big fan of their driver lineup, Alex Albon and Logan Sargeant. Alex finished P13 in the championship and Logan finished 21st. Alex had an absolutely fantastic year, definitely overachieved expectations in that car. And Logan, is probably safe to say, struggled for a lot of the season, but did show flashes of some pace and some ability that earned him another season. Now, if he has another season like this going into 2024, maybe not. But, all in all, Williams definitely outperformed where a lot of people expected them to be. And so definitely cannot be understated. I think their most memorable moment of the season has to come at the U.S. Grand Prix, the first double points finish in more than a few years. Obviously, you have Logan Sargeant scoring his first point in F1 at his home race. Well, his second home race here in Austin. I was actually there in person to see it. It was very exciting, and I think that's definitely something to be very, very proud of if you're them. I think their main focus for 2024 should be to definitely look at unlocking more consistent downforce when you're not involved in straight line speed. We all know the Williams is very slippery in a straight line, but they really do struggle when you're required to put in a lot of downforce setups and try and be stable through the corners. If they're able to figure that out, I think there's a lot of opportunity ahead to continue even pushing up the grid even further than they did last year. All right, let's move on to the French outfit Alpine, who had a driver lineup of Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon, who finished 11th and 12th in the driver's standings, respectively. I think this is probably one of the more consistent driver pairings that we saw over the course of the year. It always felt like Alpine was right there, kind of always consistently scoring points, but maybe not all the way up the order like you might expect, or definitely maybe not all the way down the order, as we saw a few times this season for some teams. So they were definitely probably one of the more consistent race teams across the entire season, and that's definitely something to be applauded. They probably just didn't finish and take the jump that they were kind of hoping they would coming off of the 2022 season. So I think their most memorable moment of the season has to be Esteban Ocon's performance in Monaco. He came out of absolutely nowhere and put that thing on the podium in Monaco, and it was one of the more exciting race weekends on the calendar, I think, just because we got to see a lot of that unexpectedness kind of come through, and Esti Bessie was 100% back on the podium again. And I think their main focus for 2024 definitely needs to be get more from that power unit and don't be such a liability at those straight line high speed circuits. I think it's definitely the one thing that held them back the most last year, where they just did not have the power to keep up in straight line applications and power circuits. So if they're able to do that and continue this level of consistency, good things will come. Moving on to Aston Martin, probably the biggest surprise of the entire grid. Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll propelling them to a 4th place finish in the Constructors' Championship, with Alonso finishing 4th in the drivers and Lance Stroll finishing 10th. Definitely an absolutely comeback season of the ages for Fernando Alonso, kind of coming out of nowhere right from the jump in Bahrain and finishing P2 on the podium. And I can't remember how many races in a row it was, but it was very exciting to see him competing at the front end again. And so hopefully they're able to kind of continue to develop the car from there. They really struggled in development as the season stretched on, as we saw them slide further and further down the order in terms of the constructors. And actually, I misquoted that. They actually ended up finishing fifth in the constructors, not fourth, like I said. So they definitely need to continue pushing on. Their most memorable moment of the season has to be round one with Alonso's explosive emergence. And especially as all the press that followed it. I kind of touched on it a little bit. I don't think anyone was expecting Aston Martin to come out and compete like that. They did in Bahrain, and it was one of the more exciting moments of the season, just coming up, new season starts, and you see Fernando Alonso and an Aston Martin all of a sudden fighting at the front. It was very, very fun. I can't wait to see what they do next. I think their main focus for 2024 has to be getting their drag situation figured out. They were one of the draggiest cars on the grid. And so I think if they were able to get that more under control to take, better advantage of higher speed circuits, they definitely can take that next step. Coming down to the final four here, McLaren finishing fourth in the championship after having a horrid start to Bahrain, about as almost opposite to Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin as you can get. They end up finishing fourth in the constructors, with Lando Norris finishing sixth in the drivers and Oscar Piastri finishing ninth. I think their most memorable moment of the season has to be the Qatar sprint race. We saw Oscar Piastri winning the sprint race in Qatar for his first win in F1. Yes, it was a sprint race, but it was definitely a massive what-if type weekend for McLaren. But it's got to be that sprint race. It was an absolutely fantastic development for Oscar Piastri, who had just went on a tear at points this season, culminating it all in a sprint race win in Qatar. Absolutely fantastic for the young man, and I can't wait to see what he does next. I think their main focus for 2024, bring at minimum the same car to Bahrain, aka do not go backwards. They came into the 2023 season with relatively high expectations before playing one of the biggest duds in Bahrain I think I've ever seen, with Oscar retiring due to software issues and Lando having to pit approximately 6 million times due to some leak in the air system, I believe. I can't remember exactly what it was at this point. But at minimum, bring in the same car, compete on the sharp end of the grid, and I think you'll be well on your way. Moving on to our top three in the constructors, starting with Scuderia Ferrari, with Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz finishing 5th and 7th in the drivers. Ferrari had probably one of the weirder seasons, always fighting at the front, but never on the pace enough to quite battle for wins outside of potentially Singapore, which they ended up winning it. So they did get one win on the season, the only non-Red Bull win on the year. So that definitely goes down as their most memorable moment of the season. When a year where Red Bull won 21 of the 22 possible races, you have to say that the most memorable moment for that team that other one race has to be it. I think the main focus for 2024 is to rein in their tire wear issues. They definitely did suffer from tire wear issues, definitely not to the level that the Haas did, but they definitely had issues with tire wear on certain high tire deg circuits that really kept them from really fighting at the front. So if they're, again, able to rein that in, get that under control, they definitely have the engine power to deal with power circuits, and I think they have enough of an aero advantage over some teams as well, that if they can just get that tire wear reined in just a little bit, I think they'll definitely be competing towards the front and potentially for podiums week in and week out. Moving on now, our second to final team, Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, the driver lineup. Lewis finishing second in the World Drivers' Championship, with George coming in 8th. Bit of a disappointing year for George Russell, who I think was probably expecting to compete a little closer towards the top 3 rather than the top 10 in terms of the drivers, especially after a pretty stellar rookie season in the Mercedes in 2022. So 2023 was definitely a bit of a step back for George. He definitely just did not seem to gel with the car as much as he probably needed to really pull out the consistency and performance that it seemed like Lewis was finally able to really connect with the car. So I would say that their most memorable moment of the season isn't necessarily a good one. It's definitely got to be Lewis Hamilton's disqualification at the U.S. Grand Prix. Lewis, one of his most strongest races from last season in the U.S. He loves racing at COTA, and this one was no different. Ultimately, he and Charles Leclerc were both disqualified. This was probably Lewis's best chance at a win. It was one of the best races we've seen of him in the last couple of years, but unfortunately just I think it was 0.01 millimeters of plank wear was enough to disqualify him and Charles Leclerc. And so while it sucks to say that your most memorable moment was a bad one, it is definitely one of the memories that I have the most vivid outside of the fact that I was there to see it happen. I think their main focus for 2024 is, I think their plan all along is definitely just to bring more of a consistent foundation into the year to develop around. We saw them move to their B-Spec car partway through the 2023 season to try and unlock and figure out exactly what went wrong with their zero pod design. And I think they did unlock a little bit more performance out of just having a much more consistent and stable foundation to build off of. And so I think if they're able to do that for over an entire offseason, and they could potentially try and fix a lot of the things that they dug too deep a hole in with the W13 and the beginning and the first iteration of the W14. So good luck, Mercedes. You got a long way to go digging out of this hole, but I guess you got to start from somewhere. And now we come to Red Bull with Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez obviously finishing first and second in the Drivers' Championship and winning the Constructors' Championship as well. It's the first 1-2 for Red Bull, if not ever, at least in a very long time in the Drivers. I believe it's ever. I mean, what can you say? It's one of the most dominant seasons in F1, if not the most dominant seasons by a team in F1 has ever seen. Max Verstappen won 19 of the 22 races, with 2 more being won by Sergio Perez. Definitely, I don't know how much more you can really say about about last season than that. I think their most memorable moment of the season kind of ties into that. I think it's crossing the line in Abu Dhabi to round off one of the most dominant seasons F1 has ever seen. I don't know if you can pick out really any other moment. Unless you want to say that their only other most memorable moment was not winning in Singapore, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt here, finishing it off in Abu Dhabi with another dominant race and another dominant win by Max Verstappen. I don't think they would have it any other way. And I think their main focus for 2024 is to use the extended stretch of development that they had on the 2024 car to good use and continue to hold other teams at arm's length. I think they definitely have tried to do that, and while I do think they're probably nearer to the limit that these ground effects cars can have than the other teams, they definitely had the advantage in basically being able to stop development on the 2023 car halfway through the season and could start focusing ahead. So they might have even found something else. Who really knows? And guys, that's the shortest version of the 2023 season I can give you. And now we move on to preparing for the 2024 season. We are very quickly approaching car release season. Obviously, McLaren at this point, as of the day I'm recording this, is already released their livery for 2024, but I'm guessing they have something else planned because they still are having a car launch party event. I'll go through each team and when their respective car release date is. We start off with Haas kicking us off on February 2nd. Then we have Kick Sauber on February 5th. Williams also on February 5th. Alpine February 7th. Visa Cash App Red Bull, which I will no longer be referring to from this point out. Quote me on that. On February 8th. Aston Martin February 12th. Ferrari February 13th. A dual day of Mercedes and McLaren on February 14th. I think I saw somewhere that McLaren is doing something at Silverstone for their car launch. No idea, but that's also be on February 14th. And then finally, Red Bull on February 15th with F1 preseason testing coming not soon after that. It's going to be a wild. I cannot wait to see the 2024 iterations of the cars and the new liveries. I'm more excited for liveries than I was last year just because, I don't know, I think there could be some really interesting and creative things done this year after seeing some teams make some bold choices in 2023. So I'm excited for it. But guys, I can't wait for the season to get underway and to get back on track. They've teased us a little bit in some lower level racing series starting to get started, as well as the beginning of the IMSA season over in America with the Daytona 24 just wrapping up here recently. And what an amazing start to the year in motorsport. But with that said, there's nothing like the anticipation of the F1 season getting going, and preseason testing is right around the corner. Stay tuned to the channel for my 2024 season predictions. And hey, let's have a great season, and that'll wrap it up for me here. Absolutely appreciate you guys taking me over the 2023 season, and I can't wait to continue making content for 2024. But Until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.